Hello everybody, I'm Ray. You know me, or you don't. Shut up. You either know me or you don't. I don't have to say it, huh? On my trip back from Missouri to Oregon, I made a video series about that, and you might have watched it. On that trip back, I thought, you know what? I've never seen some good old campground survival tips. How to get through a campground victoriously. So I decided, out of all my years of camping, that I would put together a list. And I was going to put together a top 10 list. And I couldn't put together 10. So I put together a dozen. And at the end, you'll want to stick around. I've got a bonus one for you that you've never thought about.
Okay, that didn't really say anything, but it looks like those are bathrooms right there.
Campground survival tip number 1. Know where the bathrooms, showers, the water spigots, the dumpsters, the trash cans, know where all that stuff is. Why? Let me tell you what, you feel pretty silly as you're driving into your campground, and you know how most campgrounds are in loops. You camp in a loop, and then there's a shower or whatever, bathrooms right in the middle of the loop that everyone can walk to. Well, you know, you go around a loop and you say, hey, there's a water spigot. And then you drive a little bit further and there's your campsite. And you get out and you're doing your camping and you walk all the way back around, halfway around the loop to get to that water spigot. You walk back around to your camp, and then as you leave camp that next morning, you go continue around the loop, and just 2 sites down, just 15 steps away or whatever, there was another water spigot. And lo and behold, they were even on a map somewhere showing you where all the water spigots were. How do I know this?
South Beach, Oregon, baby. I have no idea where the bathrooms are.
If you have to go to the bathroom really bad, and the bathroom that's right next to you is occupied or closed for cleaning, you want to know where the next bathroom is, because that could be the difference between good old fortunate relief and an embarrassing situation. That's tip number 1. Campground survival tip number 2. Always book or reserve your campsite based on your needs. You're going to feel very out of place if you book a 60-foot pull-through campsite with electric and water because you need to charge some batteries and you want to be able to fill your water bottles and stuff before you leave. And you pull in there and you're right next to some gigantic fifth wheels and motorhomes, and you're on this little motorcycle kind of out of the way. Does the site have shade? Are you going to need shade? Is it really hot during the daytime and you need shade? Or is it cold out and you want to have as much sun as possible? What does that site have? Does it have showers, toilets? Do you need all that stuff? Sometimes you don't need a shower. Other times you've been riding all day, it's 100 degrees outside, you've dropped your big old adventure bike 3 times, picked it up, and you are stinky, hot, and sweaty, and a shower is the number 1 thing on the list. So your campground needs to have showers. Okay, campsite survival tip number 3 is always keep your camp picked up, clean, and orderly. Why is that? Well, first of all, camp hosts, when they come around, if they see you running a tight ship, everything's picked up, trash put away, you know, everything's orderly, they drive on by every time. They usually will stop. I've seen them stop and talk to people who've kind of let their place get a little trashy, stuff laying everywhere. And those people get bothered several times a day. So if you're running a tight ship, you pretty much get left alone. That's tip number 3. Okay, campground survival tip number 4. So don't stare at people. When you're in a campground, you're already right next to them. Try not to just stare at them. Even though you're sitting there with nothing to do, it's an hour before dark, you don't want to start your campfire yet, and you're just sitting there, maybe meditating, reading a book, listening to a podcast, whatever you do. Don't sit there and stare into the next camp at what everybody else is doing. That makes people feel uncomfortable. You're out there for your camping experience. Don't be trying to live your neighbor's camping experience. Ooh, this is a good one, and it's happened to me many times, and it's probably happened to you too. Survival tip number 5 is don't walk through other people's campsites. Even though the bathroom is right there and the walkway is halfway around the drive, don't just go walking right through somebody's camp because it's the closest way to the bathroom. Please don't do that. That's not very respectful, and believe it or not, people really do want their privacy. And when they have to go out camping in a campground where they're around a bunch of other people, it's not a free-for-all. Your camp is everybody's camp, and everyone else's camp is your camp. Keep yourself to your camp, the walkways and all that, and everybody will get along. That was tip number 5. Campground survival tip number 6 is a good one, and most people don't realize this, but keep your voice down. In a campground, if you're sitting there being quiet, you can hear what people are just talking about with regular talking voices 3 or 4 camps down. You can hear exactly everything they're saying. So in a campground, when you're around a bunch of other people, try and keep it down. Just keep your voice. You don't have to whisper. Just a low indoor voice is perfectly fine. Oh man. Campground survival tip number 7. This is a good one. Don't be the person going the wrong way in a campground loop. There are usually one way entrances and exits to loops in campgrounds. And if you go the wrong way, you're more than likely going to run into somebody coming the other way. And since you are the one that went the wrong way, you're going to find yourself backing all the way back out so somebody can get out. So pay attention to whether you're going the one way or the wrong way. And campground survival tip number 8. You've probably not thought about this, and most people don't. But in most campgrounds, the wood is really dried out. It's been seasoned for at least a couple of years probably. And one bundle of firewood, which is usually anywhere from 5 to 7 pieces, and they range in size, lasts about 1.5 hours. 2 bundles of firewoods with a constant fire for 2 to 3 hours, whether you have a big fire or a smaller fire. Campground survival tip number 9. Thursdays are actually the best days to get a first come, first served campsite. Wednesdays are next, but you should get to a new campground early if you haven't reserved a site. So no matter what, if you haven't reserved a site, show up early, like before 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Because most of the campgrounds you're required to be out by 11, noon, or 1. And you give them a good hour to 2 hours to clean it, and you want to be there right then. If you wait till 4, 5, 6 o'clock, you're going to find that most of the first come, first served places are taken. Okay, campground survival tip number 10. Be kind and courteous to the campground hosts. And if you're really nice to them, they'll bring you firewood, they'll come by and see if you need anything. Why don't you go by and ask the hosts if they need anything? Sometimes they can't leave, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. One time, I stopped at the campground host whenever I first got there. I told him about what I was doing, that had never been at that campground before, that I had reserved a spot at the last minute. Well, he told me where I was at. I went over there, and in just a little while, he came over and he said, I'm sorry, but our system's a day behind, and someone actually did reserve your spot tomorrow night. And he said, why don't you get in my cart and I'll drive you around and show you to some of the sites that you could get. So I hopped in his golf cart. We rode around the camp and he pointed out different sites that were available for the next couple of nights. And then he took me to a walk-in only area. And he said, hey, He said, it's not your fault that you can't have that spot you chose. He said, if you promise not to tear things up down here, he said, you can ride your motorcycle in this walk-in only area. He said, there's nobody back there. I was like, all right. So I rode my motorcycle back into this walk-in only area. And there was 5 or 6 little camping areas back in there. But no, I was the only one because you had to carry your stuff back in there. So be nice to the hosts. You never know how they can turn a regular camping experience into a great one. Campground survival tip number 11 was a bonus tip, but keep a written record of the campgrounds you visit and what campsites you really liked in those campgrounds. So the next time you reserve them, you'll get the campsite you want. You'll know better which campsites to pick. And campground survival tip number 12 was a mega bonus, but socialize your dogs. If you take your dogs to a campground where there's people and other dogs, socialize your dogs enough where they're not going crazy every time someone walks their dogs by or every time someone strange walks by. That is very irritating to hear dogs, row, 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 just bark and bark and bark and bark and not listen to their owners. Their owners don't have any control of them. That's irritating when you're trying to have a peaceful campground experience. So socialize your dogs and get them used to people and other dogs enough to be behaved in a campground. Campground survival tip number 13. This is your bonus one at the end that nobody talks about that you should absolutely do. So if you're on a multi-day camping trip where you're sleeping in your sleeping bag every night, night after night after night after night, your body odors, your smells start seeping into that sleeping bag. So one way to keep the moisture and the odors out of your sleeping bag, when you get out of your sleeping bag in the morning, turn it inside out and just let it air out like that until you're ready to pack it away. And then whenever you set up camp, turn your sleeping bag inside out. That way it'll continue to air out. And when you go to bed at night, you can shine your flashlight on your sleeping bag, turn it right side, turn it the right way, and know that there's not going to be any bugs inside your sleeping bag. And by bugs, I mean if you left the zipper open to your tent and ants or a beetle or whatever gets in there, you don't want them crawling in your sleeping bag and at 2 o'clock in the morning you feel some beetle running up your side, freaking you out in the middle of the night. Inside out sleeping bag. I hope you enjoyed your 13 campground survival tips. If you've got any other tips, something I missed, something that you always do that helps you out, please leave it in the comments down below so everybody can benefit from that. Okay? Catch you on the next one. Later.